On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to continue the study we started last week on Micah chapter 7. We have a lot more to say, so don't go away. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me this fascinating subject called Micah chapter 7.
Micah chapter 7, and we noted on our last broadcast that the setting is the harvesting of the summer fruit. And specifically figs would be in mind here, but there are a lot of tree fruits that are harvested in late spring, early summer. And the idea of the harvest here is that the fruitful things of the earth are taken away. They're no longer available. Micah, the prophet, from the point of view of Israel, is saying, I'm just like after they've taken the summer fruit away, there's just no more fruit. And the fruit here is typical of the good man, the fruitful man, who has, in verse 2, perished from the earth. The good man is perished out of the earth, and there's none upright among men. Well, if you were with us, you remember that this word perish means to vanish. That is, to make something disappear. The good man has disappeared out of the earth, and now Micah the prophet, representative of Israel, is lamenting this fact.
And Gary, I'm convinced this is the rapture he's talking about here.
It would seem so.
In fact, from the commentaries on this verse, the earth means the world, not the land. So all over the world, good people are gone, and everyone left is bad. He says they all lie in wait for blood. There is none upright among men. They hunt every man his brother with a net, that they may do evil with both hands earnestly. The prince asketh, the judge asketh for a reward. Gary, that means that all the politicians take bribes. Nobody's worth the powder it'd take to blow them up.
So to speak.
This world is in bad shape. Now, the interesting thing, since that's to bring you up to speed on what we talked about last week, I believe that the rapture will occur under the cover of a nuclear war. And we see that in verse 4 when it says, the day of thy watchman and thy visitation cometh, now shall be their perplexity. From the Jerusalem Bible we read that the invasion is coming from the north. The north, of course, is where most of the watchmen watched for signs of an approaching enemy army, because the northern wall of Jerusalem was the most vulnerable.
As a matter of fact, the Jerusalem Bible said, instead of saying, the day of thy watchman and thy visitation cometh, it says, the day of thy visitation from the north has come. And because the word watchman can also be translated northern, it's got the very same word root. And therefore, I think a lot of commentaries, particularly Jewish commentators on this, note that the invasion is from the north. And we know very well what that means.
Yes. Now, Gary, let's go back to Ezekiel 38 and discuss the sequence of events. Because it's rather interesting to me in the battle of Gog and Magog, in which I think that's what he's referring to here, the day of thy visitation. And now shall be their perplexity. Russia is going to invade Israel from the north, and it's on that day that it appears that the rapture takes place. And so let's go back to Ezekiel 38 for a moment and review that and discuss the sequence of events. First of all, verse 13 says that the merchants of Tarshish with the young lions will say, have you come to take a spoil? Now, Gary, if Russia destroys America before the invasion of Israel, we won't be around to question her motives.
That's right. The thing you notice here in Ezekiel 38:13 is that the conditions, geopolitical and social conditions, resemble nothing quite so much as today. They do not resemble tribulational conditions. Here you have Sheba and Dedan. These are the United Arab Emirates, of the peoples of Saudi Arabia and Dubai and
Kuwait.
Kuwait would be a
You
good
know,
one.
the man who rules Kuwait is named Saba, or Sabah.
That's right.
Sheba.
Sheba.
That's it.
That's right.
Bingo, right on the dot.
So you have the oil magnates here, if you will, in league with the merchants of Tarshish. We know very well who they are, no doubt about it. They are the merchant bankers whose traffic and commerce controls the entire world banking system.
Who control the commodities of this world. And one big commodity, of course, is oil.
Mm-hmm. And so we find here the conditions are not tribulational. They're the normal operating conditions that we see today.
Pre-tribulation.
Pre-tribulation.
Just before the tribulation.
Absolutely.
In fact, I think Micah chapter 7 describes the events leading up to the final 7 years. I think we can see those 7 years as we get further into this chapter. But what is interesting to me is our nation is still viable as a nation when Russia makes her invasion. So Russia does not take us out in a preemptive strike to neutralize us so that she can invade the Middle East. Now, I have thought possibly in the past that she could do that, but I must say, Gary, the merchants of Tarshish, that is the European merchants, that's the European nations, and the young lions, which would include the United States in that, the oil cartel nations, the political side of the rulers of those nations that feed the world its commodities, are still a viable entity when they say to Russia, what are you doing?
Yeah, and you have to remember now, in the tribulation, we have solar events, solar flares, we have a mountain falling into the sea, we have great earthquakes, we have literally continents cracking up, the greatest earthquakes in the history of the world. We have disabling kinds of horrors happening. And yet it appears that here in Ezekiel 38, none of that has happened yet. And we find a similar situation, I think, in Revelation 6, where you have the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Apparently when they ride forth, that is just before they ride forth, everything is normal. Things on earth are just like they always have been. Everyone is, as to use the old expression, fat, dumb, and happy. And they just are
prosperous.
They're prosperous. They think everything's going to be all right for the foreseeable future.
And it all kicks off when the white horse and the red horse ride forth. And that is a tremendous scenario. Now, in Ezekiel 38, Gary, as soon as the question is posed to Russia, why are you invading Israel?
Right.
Then everything breaks loose. God says, I'm going to pour out my fire upon Gog, so possibly a nuclear destruction of Russia. And he says also those that dwell carelessly in the isles. That's the coastlines, Gary. And to me, the coastlines there refer to the seaports where the merchants of Tarshish offload and unload their commodities.
Also, J.R., we have verse 18 of Ezekiel 38, which has always impressed me. It says, and it shall come to pass at the same time, and I love it when you get these little time markers. It shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord God, that my fury shall come up in my face. So this marks the beginning of God's fury. In other words, it hasn't come up into his face yet, but it will at that time.
Wow. So that's when the big destruction takes place, and that's when the saints are raptured, I think, under the cover of that worldwide nuclear war. So we've got what we have in the Middle East right now is the Palestinians claiming they're going to declare a Palestinian state, and that's a powder keg just waiting to blow up.
Absolutely.
Syria is also there with an ailing Assad, possibly to help stir the pot. And Damascus, Syria is going to be destroyed, Isaiah chapter 17. And then the Russian invasion, and then everything blows up. That seems to be the scenario as I see it.
And what we have here is Russia with a delegation composed largely of members of the United Arab Republic, the Islamic nations, being pulled into a battle. The metaphor is, God says, I will put hooks into thy jaws, and I'll turn you around and pull you down. And so Gog, or we believe that to be the leader of Russia, will be yanked into a battle, perhaps unprepared,
Yes.
perhaps not fully prepared for the outcome.
I think, Gary, you're right on. That's exactly what the Lord is referring to. Unprepared. Of course, Russia could not be more unprepared than she is today. And yet, with what's going on in Kosovo, Russia is beginning to say, hey, and they're liable to get involved. There's a lot more to this. We'll be back in just a moment. In Revelation chapter 6, the rider on the white horse rides forth. It's interesting to me, Gary, that he has no arrows. There's a bow in his hand, but no arrows. The question is, why?
Well, people have speculated about this for a long time. Let me just say that we believe this to be the Antichrist, riding forth on a white horse as a counterfeit Christ. He rides forth here prior to the Great Tribulation. And he rides forth, in the words of the King James, conquering and to conquer. That is, he hasn't conquered yet. This is the very beginning of his activity. And you don't go out and establish a political ground in 3 or 4 days. It'll take months at least, and perhaps some years for him to do this. He rides out with a bow. And people have said, where are the arrows? And it's kind of fascinating that this bow is a typical word for a war bow in the Greek. It's a word for a war bow without any arrows. And J.R., could it be that the Antichrist has been involved in some battles that have depleted his resources?
Depleted his arrows. They are gone. They are not there. And he is the victor in this battle with the red horse.
Yeah.
That's what it appears to me, is he is the victor over the red horse that takes peace from the earth. And to me, it sounds like he didn't start the war, that the red horse started the war.
Yeah.
And he ended up as the victor of the war, and it cost him all of his arsenal to do it.
You know, when God's judgment comes, and here it's officiated by the Lamb of God, the Son of God, the Lord Jesus Christ, when the seals begin to be opened, there are certain things due to happen. There will be famine, there will be pestilence, disease, there will be war, unspeakable war. But this man on the white horse somehow turns that to his own capital. He's able to, shall we say, come out standing on his feet, and is so adept politically and perhaps verbally. Well, he's called a mouth speaking great things. We know he's verbally adept. He's quite a guy.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it is, back when the thrones of Europe were established in the 9th, 10th centuries, 11th century, first a marauding army would go through a village. They lived in a feudal society somewhat, and there were no established governments in Europe. We're talking 9th, 10th century. And the interesting thing is, after this marauding army left, having pillaged the people, in would ride this man on a white horse. Oh, you poor people, if you'll make me your king, I'll save you from this marauding army. Little did they know that marauding army belonged to his cousin. This was called the old protection racket.
Sure.
This is the way the thrones of Europe were established. And so, one by one, these various countries of Europe, as we see them today, established thrones, and lo and behold, what do you know? The thrones all belong to cousins.
That's right. and second cousins and third cousins. But you know, J.R., the Antichrist is the ultimate manifestation of this type. He's going to be a man who literally can snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, come out standing on his feet, supernaturally empowered, and the people will love him because they will think of him as their Messiah, their protector, the man who's going to come and change
Save them from this red horse.
Save them, absolutely.
And of course, we've long believed the red horse has a connotation to the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And so we've got this scenario. Now, the interesting thing about all of this is that as the tribulation period proceeds, Israel, which has been under the judgment of God for all these many years, suddenly is brought back home again. And they come home from the nations. In fact, Micah seems to indicate, Gary, that these people have borne the indignation of the Lord. Verse 9 says, because I have sinned against him, until he plead my cause and execute judgment, he will bring me forth to the light, and I shall behold his righteousness. This appears to be Israel returned from the great diaspora, dispersed among the nations.
And verse 10 has an amazing reference, I think. The very next verse, then she that is mine enemy shall see it, and shame shall cover her, which said unto me, where is the Lord thy God? Mine eyes shall behold her. Now she shall be trodden down as the mire of the streets. And she, being the enemy of Israel, I think we know who she might be.
Yes. You know, Gary, she has to be Mystery Babylon.
Yeah.
Has to be. Mystery Babylon will be destroyed, Revelation chapter 17 and 18. And here, Micah says, she shall be trodden down as the mire of the streets. There it is. The interesting thing is, Gary, that this is a reference back to those who say, where is the Lord thy God? Well, let me read to you from Psalm 42. My tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, where is thy God? Gary, that's the same question. So what happened to the Jews in World War II is now finally going to be avenged, and will be avenged to the tune that Mystery Babylon will be destroyed. What a tremendous chapter Micah 7 is.
Micah 7, it begins, woe is me, for I am as when they have gathered the summer fruits, as the grape gleanings of the vintage. There's no cluster to eat. My soul desired the first ripe fruit. The good man is perished out of the earth. J.R., there's a wonderful passage that ties together with this. Isaiah 57 says, the righteous perisheth. It's the same Hebrew word, vanish.
Ovad.
Ovad means to vanish. The righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart, and merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous are taken away from the evil to come.
That's a pre-tribulation rapture.
You bet it is.
Wow. Now this word osaph here, you said taken away?
Yeah.
Ovad is perished, but then it goes on twice to say these people have been taken away.
Literally pulled up or lifted.
Raptured.
Yeah, raptured. Oh, yes. And, you know, as we look at Isaiah, there are several places that seem to indicate a pre-tribulation rapture. Some of the minor prophets do too, and we've spoken about them from time to time. But J.R., the timeline is very clear here. First comes the good man being pulled out of the earth, made to disappear. Then comes the day of the visitation from the north. And then comes a new political system dominated by Mystery Babylon the Great. Of course, we know who is the chief political figure of that system. It's the Antichrist.
And then we have in verse 11, in the day that thy walls are to be built, in that day shall the decree be far removed. In that day shall he also come to thee from Assyria, and from the fortified cities, and from the fortress to the river, and from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. In other words, the Jews are coming back home. And the decree that God will scatter the Jews to the nations is removed. And God is now bringing them back home again. And the kingdom is going to be established.
You know, Zephaniah the prophet refers to a decree here. He says, before the decree bring forth, before the day passes chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you, it says, then seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be that ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. And here the decree refers to the Great Tribulation.
Yeah. hid from the day of his anger. That's pre-tribulation rapture again, Gary.
There it is again. I mean, we just can't help finding it no matter where we look.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And then listen to verse 13 of Micah 7. Notwithstanding the land shall be desolate. Gary, there's another clue word, goes back to Leviticus 26, and the people being scattered because of the not keeping the sabbatical cycles. The land lays desolate so it can enjoy its Sabbaths.
That's right.
And let's listen to verse 20. Thou wilt perform the truth to Jacob and mercy to Abraham, which thou hast sworn unto our fathers from the days of old.
Wow.
Gary, that's the reference to Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of old, the years, consider the years of many generations. The days of old being the 6 days of creation, and the years of many generations, the 6,000 years, typified by those 6 days.
In other words, God has not forgotten. He will not forget. His timetable is exactly on schedule. People are saying, where's the Lord thy God? Well, he's around. He's around, and he's doing exactly what he said he would do. And JR, that's the beautiful part of studying Micah chapter 7. And I would suggest to those of you listening to us right now, if you want an excellent study, just sit down, read Micah chapter 7.
Isn't it interesting, Gary, that Micah 7 has all of the ingredients in it that all of the other prophets talk about? He's touched on everything, including the end of the 6th millennium and the beginning of the 7th millennium.
That's right.
Incredible. Micah chapter 7, one of the most fascinating chapters in the Bible. We'll be back.